At the moment, it seems that you cannot go a week without jumping into the mainstream media and seeing another well-known business in New Zealand entering liquidation, which is pretty scary. And it's probably been some time coming because at the start of the year, in one of Adrian Orr's final interviews, he suggested that there can be a 5-year lag from the bottom of the economic activity, which you could argue is June-ish 2024, or maybe it's 2025, but 5 years from that through to washing out all of the bad debt in the system. So how some of these businesses end up in liquidation is that they simply get to the point where they can no longer meet their obligations to the IRD. Now, what creates such a long lag is that people get behind on their taxes, like GST and PAYE, and then they ignore it for a while, and then eventually they realize that they can't stay on top of it, and they get in touch with the IRD and ask if they can go on an installment arrangement. Now, the IRD are actually very helpful, and an installment arrangement can be set up very easily online these days as well. So the IRD always want to try and collect the maximum amount of tax that they can get from the taxpayer, and they don't want to see a business going under because then they run the risk of not being able to collect that tax. So you could argue that they want to see some of these businesses try to trade out of it so that they can collect this money and then use it to fund the police, the teachers, etc. But eventually, what can happen is people can't keep up to date with these installment arrangements, and the IRD may notice and eventually take action. But can they administer and look at all of these companies at any one time? Well, with, I think, well over 500,000 companies in New Zealand, probably not. So do they have the resource and the administration to be able to stay on top of this at scale? Probably not. So I think what we're seeing is a number of businesses who have started to struggle financially and then use the bank of the IRD, let's call it, for this video's purpose, to fund their business. So instead of being able to pay their GST or their PAYE, they simply don't pay that. That extends the runway of running that business, and then they try and liaise with the IRD to stay on top of that, or come up with a solution whereby they'll pay X amount each month and the IRD may be happy with that. But eventually, if that may fail, the business may accept their fate and they may have to liquidate that business. So they would seek advice around having the business closed down and what their obligations are to then repay that debt. And in many cases, they won't actually have to repay that debt if they seek good advice and have it structured to a point where they can walk away from the company and the debt. And in some cases, they may even start another company relatively soon after and start trading again. So some of you will be reading about this in the media for the first time in your business career thinking, well, how is that even possible? Is that legal? But there are specific rules about how it can be done, so we won't pretend that we're experts in that space, but it can be very common for you to see a business be liquidated, but the shareholders and the directors go on to run another or maybe similar business soon after. But why I think we're seeing such a large volume of liquidations as well is that the IRD are taking this more seriously, and some of these business owners are accepting their fate that they're not going to be able to trade their way out of this. And obviously it's highly emotional for them, and we're not saying that businesses deliberately run their businesses into the ground and get behind on these. This is just part of playing the game of business. Sometimes it can be due to external factors or running the business poorly or not being paid by somebody, but eventually the debt either has to be repaid or the business owner has to accept, I don't know if I can trade out of this. So some statistics from the crew at Waterstone that I saw them talking about, and if we keep it to GST and PAYE, they've got a chart here which tracks the overdue GST and PAYE debt at each March quarter since 2018, and it provides a snapshot of business health across New Zealand. What we're seeing is stark. Total overdue GST and PAYE debt has nearly quadrupled from 1.4 billion in March 2018 to 5.2 billion in March 2025. Now we're now into September 2025, and with that bad GDP print of the June quarter, you would imagine that this trend will not be going down. It's probably only increasing. So there is plenty of stress across the different tax types. So GST debt alone has reached 3.3 billion, whilst employer activities debt sits at 1.9 billion dollars. So if you are under financial strain, you're not the only one. The suggestion would be to put your hand up and ask for help, whether that's your accountant or maybe, unfortunately, you have to have an accepting conversation that the business that you're currently running may not be fit for purpose for the current economy that we're in, and maybe you need to speak to the likes of Norling Law or Waterstone, who produce some of these statistics around some of the liquidation data to get some help, because there is help out there, and there are people who do this for a living to help you get through a period like this. So August liquidations fell 13% from July, bringing total liquidations for the year to 1,708, which is still approximately 11% higher than 2024. So much like Adrian Orr said at the start of January 2025, it can take 5 years for this bad debt to wash out of the system. There's still, by the looks of it, seems like there's a number of liquidations to come, and maybe, just maybe, some of it is people exiting business in New Zealand and moving themselves to Australia and getting out of the country and starting afresh in a completely different country.